but no stakes of like, no one's paying me to do it. And so I can just sort of see what happens. And so many kind of leaps for me personally in the work I make, I think happened on projects like my Inktober's or on certain commissions that I've done where I was like, whoa, like I found something, like how can I take that and stick it into the next issue in a way that's going to, meld in a little bit.
Hey, thanks for listening. This week's intro comes to you from Salida, Colorado. My wife and I are out here for some mountain activity and family visiting. And I wouldn't say that there's been as much time to get that mental space I was hoping for so far between the have-tos with family and the ongoing work projects, which don't seem to care that I'm away. There's still been some time to think. One thing I have been able to do a couple of weeks ago, I don't know how long ago, but a new writer friend of mine that I met at the Nebula conference earlier this year, we shared the first 50 pages of our books. And, me being the pushing me, I said, I'll go first. We had like an hour and a half long talk, which was great because I think it's so important to share your work with people in the same discipline. It's just one of the key and core ways to improve the thing that you do. We all know the mistakes we make. It's easy to be blind to them because of timing or whatever. It's so much easier to see if someone's like missing something, going, oh, you didn't explain this, or I don't understand what's happening here. Because it's not in our head, but we know the tools. So it's kind of cool. I've always found it to be really helpful for my process, seeing how others put their stories together and then thinking about the pieces. It forces me to contend with the writing craft in a way that's kind of hard to do for myself. And then taking those tools and applying it to my own work as much as I can in the terms of being objective. I don't think I could possibly do it if I didn't have this opportunity to work and have relationships with other writers. I have yet to hear what he thinks about my work, so I'm waiting in the wind and not by his actions, it's mine being on vacation. So this week's guest is Tyrell Cannon. Like so many guests this season, I really think season 12 has been the Heroes Con lineup, which is absolutely fine in my book because I have loved every conversation. His work, man, it lives in this sweet spot between realism and cartoony. For me, I think it's such a great place because you can apply this look to so many genre. And I don't know, like I want to see superhero books this way. I want to see action books. I want to see funnier books. I want to see all sorts of stuff in these kinds of styles. So I naturally kind of, go, oh, I like this. If you're not familiar with his work on his book, ERIS or BEEF BROS, you can check out his brand new series. It just came out last week from Image called The SCHLUB. And so he is the artist on this with some great talent. The book looks great. It reads great. I've read the first issue and it's wonderful. So there's a lot of cool moving pieces in this story and it's a lot of fun. So I can recommend something like this if you're into kind of high action and irreverent storytelling. This is me with Tyrell Cannon.
I think about podcasting, talking about visual stuff. Behind you, over your left shoulder, I think it's your left shoulder, I see that you have an artist edition in the box.
Yeah. I've got a few back there. That one I'm using to flatten out my comp copies of
nice.
SCHLUB, and that is the new Michael Golden Marvel stories. Oh my gosh,
dude! Whew. It's
so good.
Unbelievable. And the funny thing is it rolled up in the mail, I guess 2 weeks ago, and I had forgotten about it completely. And I thought, did somebody buy this and send it to me? Like I couldn't remember even seeing it, ordering it, nothing. It just And I was on their website going, what is this thing? Like I had
Yeah.
no idea what it was. And I'm looking, I'm like, wait, what? Huh? I've no, yeah. So, and it is unbelievable. And it has 3 of my all-time favorite stories of his in there. And I'm like, wow, like this was like made for me. Like,
Yeah, it feels like it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of his and consider him a big influence. And same. I mean, I feel like it has all the things I wanted. It's got that
mhm,
Spider-Man story. It has that Wolverine Larry Hama story,
which
and it
is
has
so
the
cool.
Nam stuff. Yeah, it's so cool,
Yeah.
and it's just like blowing my mind. And I went to get it. My shop that I go to for this kind of stuff is Challengers here in Chicago, and they said this was the most ordered artist edition they've had.
Oh
And
my
so they went ahead
God.
and bought some extra ones. And I was there with my buddy, Dan, and he hadn't ordered one. He bought one of them just when he saw mine. And then I'm on a kind of a group call with some other artists pretty often, and so we've all been talking about it. You know, me and like Stegman, who works on the SCHLUB with me. He's
Yep.
like he put one of the images in there from that Spider-Man story, and he's just like, I can't believe that a human being drew this. You know, it's
It's
just so good.
Oh my God. Okay, so like let's just be nerds and just completely dive into this one because like this like like and full disclosure, I don't blab about it a lot, but he was my mentor in comics. Like I've known him
Oh,
since
cool.
1990, I
Wow.
think. Yeah, so um and we've been longtime friends, and he's just one of the I owe him so much in so many ways. And but it was it like that Spider-Man, you know, issue with the Hulk is so ridiculously good. And I'm going to tell you, it is the one comic that I could never pass up. Like if I'm in a comic shop and it's there, I'm like, I'll buy it. Like it was
Hmm.
like one of these, reoccurring kind of stories for
Hmm.
me. And I've looked at that thing thousands of times. I mean, it's just I've soaked it up in every angle possible. And I kid you not, like somewhere in the last, I don't know, 8 months or so, I'm looking through it again. And I realized that I think there's only one panel in the entire book that he used perspective lines for. The entire thing is all eyeballed. And I'm like, how did I miss this? How did I
Yeah.
like go from the person who looked at this as the sort of one of the Bibles to like study to figure out how to do this incredibly hard job and not realize that like, yeah, the principles of perspective, 2, 1, 2, 3 point perspective. You can fake fisheye, sure, all by your eye, but yet you sit there with the stupid pins and long straight edges, spending all this time
Yeah.
eyeball trying to make it look or trying to make it perfect,
Right. Right. No, he finds that place where it's between correct and you need a little bit of free form in there, you know. And I
Okay.
struggle to find that balance too. I think a lot of artists, especially nowadays with all the tools that are available, things tend to flatten out and look a little bland. And I think it's just because they're not adding any sort of it's not mistakes, but it's like the flourish of the human hand that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And you look back at that stuff, and that's what really jumps out to me about people like Michael Golden and other artists, where it looks correct. If you were to sit down and measure it all out, it probably wouldn't be correct, but that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really matter. You know, you can't be completely wacky with your perspective has to sort of make sense.
Right.
And I think the longer you do it, and you know this probably too, the longer you do it, the more you just kind of get a knack for. If it's a simple perspective, you can just kind of knock it in. You know,
Yeah.
I'm barely starting to get to that point myself.
Yeah, it's but it was it was just like one of those real sort of shameful events for me where I go, how did I miss this? How did I miss this thing just glaring at me the whole time? Um, yeah, and that the Hama Golden story in there, the Wolverine thing, like he freehands everything in that, the panel
Yeah.
borders, everything, and I'm like, okay, like that's like, and I remember looking at that when it first came out, like in '92, and I'm like, man, just what a laydown. He's just like, oh, by the way, it's a royal flush. Move on, and you're like, okay, okay,
That
buddy.
one, that's a story that I wasn't aware of until kind of recently. I think I found it via Aaron Conley had posted something about it, and I was like, "What is this? What is this from?" And he's like, "Oh, holiday special." So I
Yeah.
immediately went and seeked it out, and when I got it, I was just reveling. I love silent stories. I love Hama,
Uh-huh.
and I love Michael Golden. And then I immediately, just because of the age it came out and kind of the way they had done it, I was like, man, I really want to see this in black and white. And then a few weeks later, I find out it's in the artist edition. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it is pretty incredible. And I guess that holiday story came out 1 year after my holiday story, which was my sort of air quote debut at
okay.
Marvel, and vastly different.
What was that one? I don't know if I caught that one.
That was a holiday special for the for Power Pack. They brought Power Pack back. Wasn't a regular title, but for some reason, I guess Wheezy talked them into doing a holiday special because June Brigham would come back to draw it. So they were like,
Oh, cool.
cool, we'll do some backup issues, stuff in there. And so Dan Slott and I got the call to do our sort of debut stuff in that, which was funny.
That's very cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Holiday
Yeah.
special. It seems like they try out a lot of things there. They'll give a new person a shot sometimes. They'll
Yeah.
put some old timers on just whatever they want to do, and that's always fun. I think there's a lot of hidden gems in those one-off issues throughout the big two.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you staying on my favorite subject, but how did you first find Golden's work?
Honestly, it was probably when I was a kid reading comics. I was a big Punisher fan, and so it was probably Punisher covers was the first thing
Those
I saw.
covers.
Yeah. And man, his Punisher covers are amazing. And I remember always being like, that wasn't, Punishers had a wild ride. we don't have to get too far into it, but I think at that era, it was there was so many Punisher titles and varying degrees of quality. And so I would see these golden covers and I gotta get this. And of course the insides vastly different in almost every case. But those kind of became ingrained in my mind as like what the golden Punisher stuff was like, that's what that kind of the glove Punisher can look like. And became a big part of that. And then I think that the other thing kind of unbeknownst to me that was probably an introduction to his work for me was Bucky O'Hare. I remember watching the show and stuff and being like, this is crazy, this is cool. Years later find out that he worked on it. And I think it was mostly just cover stuff that got me into his work, because then I would see his covers on other things like Batman and stuff. And then I finally dived in and got the Nom, at some point in my life. And then, I was like, oh my gosh, his interiors are as good or better than his covers. And he just kind of became an influence that has come in waves for me of like strength of his influence. It's always there, but certain times I try to zero in on certain artists. So right now he's one of the people I'm very much zeroed in on, is like, what lessons can I learn from his work and apply into my work or adapt into my work.
Well, you said something earlier, and the statement that came in my head regarding his work is drawing for effect.
Yeah.
So he's really great at drawing for effect. So when you think of things like the G.I. Joe yearbook, and you look at the tires and the wheels of the vehicles, how he is making them, not circles anymore. He's making them ovals, and he's stretching things to draw for effect. Like the car is skidding, so he's going to stretch that vehicle to make it look like it is, in the happening in like multiple moments in time.
I think that's a really good. I've never heard that exact phrasing before, but that's very much what I'm drawn to in a lot of people's work, but his especially, and definitely something that I'm trying to do in my work, because I feel, and I'm not trying to slam anybody or anything. I do feel like that if I was to generalize about the superhero comics coming out today, it is lacking some of that, distortion for effect. And I think that there's so many examples of artists that have done it in the past, and it used to be maybe a little more in vogue than it is now. But I'm trying to, chip away at bringing some of that back. I mean, Golden and Jason Pearson's another one for me that he's never afraid to just twist things a little bit to enhance the speed or the motion or the kind of impact of explosions or punches and those kind of things, or distorting a face, in some way. I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's it's like when in cinema, when you get to play with time, when they can slow things down and speed things up, like all that kind of cool action stuff. I think especially Jason was one of those artists I think who really, really wanted to play with time in that respect by like warping things. And it was
Right.
always so, you know, you're like, damn him, he's so cool. It was always
Well,
great.
those two especially, I've been really obsessed with some of those ideas of speed and motion and energy, and the magic of conveying those things with lines on a two-dimensional plane.
Mm-hmm.
I'm obsessed with it.
Right.
And with those two, the thing that I've been trying to learn from them is they do that, but everything they draw still has a lot of weight and a lot of light
Mm-hmm.
considered and form considered. And I
Yep.
think a lot of times when you distort things, it's really easy to lose track of form and shape and weight. And a lot of that I think is the way they both use spotted blacks and stuff. And so I've been trying
Yeah.
to apply a lot of that to my work and use it to enhance some of the, I try to do a lot of sort of motion. I don't know what you'd call them, blurring or motion sort of impressions. So
Mm-hmm.
rather than drawing like a fist,
Yeah.
right here with some speed lines behind it, I want it to look like the arm is distorting as it comes
Yes.
across the image plane.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think like the early sort of like visuals of that, like, going back, 40 plus years is like how Kirby would, enlarge things, the
Yeah,
foreground and push things in the back. And that
yeah,
was that sort of same sense of dynamism, but maybe in just more of a linear kind of approach, straight to front
right,
to back kind of way. Um, yeah. I mean, well, okay, there's two paths here. One path is I think a lot of the technology has made it so much easier to draw comic books with reference on the screen as you're drawing. So you
yeah,
can really be
yeah,
quite accurate, which is great, but it does take a lot of the cartoonist out of the job.
yeah,
And I think when you are stylizing and cartooning, that's when you can really kind of open the door up and make things kind of beyond what they are, versus adding more muscles and veins, like
right,
it's a different type of energy. And the other thing is like when you were saying about like the spotting the blacks, I mean, I think that's another missing element in a lot of modern work is that
hmm,
it's very linear. There's a
hmm,
whole lot missing in the structuring of the drawing
right,
by adding the weight of blacks, because we have at this time this technology of the coloring techniques, which are
yeah,
mind-boggling good,
yeah,
but they're taking but a lot. I think a lot of the load is being handed off to the colorists to solve the problems,
hmm,
and which, and I'm not, and I don't think I'm really knocking anybody in this thing. I just think it's a part of the process, and I think the pendulum will swing back and forth in the future.
right. I think
Yeah.
there's an ebb and a flow, and right, maybe the last 10 years or so, I think there's been kind of an obsession with kind of the advantages of digital tools, and I think that you can make good work with it. You absolutely can. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that the tool is the problem ever, in the long run. But in the short term, I think it does allow some shortcuts that I think are detrimental to an artist being able to be expressive and be individual.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like art that looks unique, right? I don't, but I can understand why a place like Marvel or DC might want very consistent stuff across their line. I get that, but for me, I always I gravitate towards artists that definitely have a voice and a vision, and that's what I want to do. I
Mm-hmm.
want, if I'm sure of anything, it's that nobody else's stuff looks like mine. And that's definitely
Totally.
a goal, is that I want it to feel like that's a Tyrell Cannon comic. The same way you look at a Michael Golden, that's a Michael Golden comic. That's sort of what I'm going for, at least.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Do you still, now you don't make comics anymore, but are you still drawing often, or how much are you sort of engaging with the visual part of the medium?
It's so little, and it's so funny you ask that question because I I, be, I do novel writing mostly, and I'm editing
Mhm.
a few people's comic books in indie comics. And one of my perks for this fundraiser, I did a writing fundraiser, was to do some some character sketches, and I'm like sitting down, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so out of shape. Like and my wife is an artist, a painter, and a sculptor, and she's like, I get that. And I said, here's the weird thing. Like if I sat down and just focused and did a very detailed work, I could muscle through that. Like I make a very detailed,
Right.
finished looking drawing,
Yep.
but to sit there and just bang out some cool ass figure, and a very loose, I look at Matt Smith's like just simple drawings he does of, like, hey, I'm doing this and that. I'm like, they're so cool. They're so simple. They're so lovely. And I'm like, man, I just want to do that, but I'm just, my mind is I don't have the reps. The reps aren't
Yeah.
there. Like I can fake the artifice, but the reps just aren't there for that drawing side of it.
It's definitely a muscle,
Oh, yeah.
I was on vacation this last weekend and I didn't really draw very much. And I came home and last night I was like looking at some of my work on the SCHLUB. And then I was like, I was simultaneously like, wow, this is pretty good. And then how did I do this? I don't remember like how did I draw these lines? I mean, I know it'll come back, but it's so weird. And I think that's why, one of the things, I've had like interns and assistants in the past. And one of the things I always tell them is, it's cliche, but you gotta draw every day. It could be anything.
Mhm.
It can just be a scribble. It can be anything. You just got to sort of keep that muscle and that brain to arm to eye sort of
Yeah.
connection flexing. You can still, if you don't draw every day, you can still look at a piece of art and like you can probably too. It's like tell what's working about it, tell what's not
Mhm.
working about it, say what's great about it. But to do it, you need to sort of have that baseline.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like I'm thinking when you were talking about it, it's like it's a tripod, and like you need all three of those things to make it stable and work really well. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's going to be a little flimsy. You can get away with a monopod, like we all know that you can you can still do it, but it's not going to be consistent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's the hard part. And I think the reason I think a lot of comic book artists are, I think, some of the best, you know, draftsmen or illustrators in the world is because it's such a mountain of drawing. You're
Hmm.
surrounded by you're drawing more than anybody else probably is in most other fields.
Yeah.
And so I think those muscles get a lot of reps, and it comes down to how much as an artist you want to push yourself to grow, because you can get comfortable too and kind of
Hmm.
just, plateau and say, great, I can do whatever weight bench press all day, but
Right.
it's nice to kind of keep pushing yourself. But I think comic book art and comic book artists are just by default going to have a little more muscle tone, I guess you'd call it, than a
Hmm.
lot of other people, because you have to do it every day or it won't get done. There's just so much drawing that has to happen.
Yeah, and it's not, and these are finished drawings. It's not like, hey, I'm doing storyboards, which is
Right.
which is
Yep.
a layout skill. It's
Yep.
a composition skill, but you don't have to have something finished. You just have something that is
Right.
translatable. So that's where my artwork stops. As I've been an art director and a designer for, I don't know, like 23, 4, 5 years. So for me, it's get that sketch done, show the sketch, and people are like, oh, okay, I get that.
Right.
But
Right.
I don't have to do anything further than that.
Right. Right. Yeah, I've done storyboard stuff in the past, and there's something fun about it, but I think my compulsion, which I think is another issue comic book artists have, is my compulsion to make lines is not satisfied by it.
Hmm.
It's like I always want to take it further. And I remember the first few storyboard gigs I ever got, I was like just going all out, and they're just
Right.
like, "What are you doing? Like, don't, like, don't. We're
Yeah.
not going to use any of those details. You're wasting your time. You're wasting our time." And
Yeah.
when I finally got it, I was like, "Okay, I can see how this is a, you just kind of you roll through it as quick as you can, you iterate, and you keep going."
Hmm. Yeah. It's so true. Like you just like, oh, but that's not enough of a drawing. They need more. Like I gotta give them more.
Yeah.
It is that compulsion. You're so right. It is not. Yeah, yeah, and hats off to people who can do both really well, like who can do the
Yeah.
comic book stuff, and it doesn't look like you're a storyboard artist, and they could do storyboards, and they don't look like a comic book artist, posing as a storyboard artist.
Yeah, those unicorns, man. I hate those guys.
Yeah, I know. I know one, and he's really nice. That's a problem. I got to figure. He's got to have a chink in his armor somewhere.
Sure, everybody does.
Yeah. Um, so tell me about, I mean, tell me about the SCHLUB. Let's just talk about that for a little bit, because you
Yeah.
sent me, issue 1 and I read it and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, and like you said, I mean, you were talking about making your artwork unique and you, like it's totally you. Like there's like, you don't look and go, well, yeah, this is so and so. Like he's in this camp. Like, and it's not like you don't have your influences, but it's not like, you're not looking like artist X Mark
Right.
II.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you read it and enjoyed it.
Mhm.
It's been, the other crazy thing, which you can relate to, I'm sure, is that, I drew issue 1 months and months and months and months ago. And so, I can look at it and still appreciate it, but I'm like, I'm working on issue 6 right now. And so you sort of see your evolution. But the Schlub, so it started out, Ryan Stegman, the infamous Ryan Stegman, he had pitched this to Image with him writing and drawing it a long time ago. And they accepted it, and he was going to do that. And it was after he had done, I think it was after he had done Superior Spider-Man. And then Marvel called him up and said, "Hey, do you want to do this thing with Donnie Cates? You want to do this Venom thing?" And he's like, "Sure." And so he did that, and that obviously turned into a big long run for him, and turned out great. I mean, those guys did some great work on that. And I think that at some point he was like, "Man, I really still want to do the Schlub, but there's no way I'm gonna be able to do it all myself anymore." And so that's when he reached out to. So I knew him and Kenny socially through. I'm on sort of a group call with some other artists and people that we sort of bounce things off each other and talk while we're working. Just so you're not isolated in the studio
Yeah.
by yourself like a lot of us are, as you know. And so Ryan's on that call, and Kenny's on that call amongst other people. And so he had seen me working on some different stuff, and I had just quit my day job in 2018, 2019. And he liked what I was doing, and he asked if I wanted to work on it. And I said, sure. And then he said, "Don't you want to know what it's about?" And I said, sure. Because, I like both of them. I had already done a pitch with Kenny in the past that didn't get picked up, but it was a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed working with both of them, respected their work. And it just felt, and it was at Image. I've wanted to have a book at Image since I was 10 years old. And so, Kenny got involved, and Ryan had sort of done an outline, but hadn't done any issue writing or character designs or anything like that. So Kenny started fleshing it out with him, the story, and then they gave me the characters, and I started making the character designs, and then we were off to the races. Image was fine with him switching to me as the artist and Kenny as the co-writer. And then after I had drawn maybe an issue or two, we got Mike Spicer involved.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan asked me, he's like, "Who do you want to color this?" And I said, "Well, if you can get Mike," I didn't think he would get Mike, because Mike is really, I think, really good, one of the best colorists right now, and always
Yeah.
busy. And we got Mike, and I was so excited. And of course, he's been a dream, and just knocking it out of the park with every issue. And John J. Hill, the letterer designer, he had worked with Ryan on Vanish and stuff. He kind of does design for all the KLC books, for the KLC press that Ryan does. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I've been working on it now for, I guess it's been about a year, just getting these character designs first, and then starting on the issues, and working my way through it. And I'm going to be hopefully wrapping up the 6th issue, which is the end of the first arc. Sometime in the next month, I should have that done.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
so yeah, that's sort of how it all came about, and how we got to where we are now. And of course, the book comes out Wednesday. So this last few weeks, I've been trying to talk to a lot of people about it, and
Yeah.
I'm excited. I want other people to be excited. As you know, it's always a grind, and trying to get your work out there, and try to tell people that don't order comics how to get comics, and tell people that are ordering comics that they need to order it, not just expect it to be on the shelf. And so yeah, it's been a ride, but it's been a blast. They're really fun to work with, all of them. Kenny and Ryan and Mike and John are all great. I feel like I'm working with a team of people that all love comics and want to make good comics. Like, that's job
Mm.
one. Make a good comic that is fun and unique and different, and brings all of our talents to the table.
Yeah.
So that's my little short, too long probably.
No, it's cool. And I mean, it's different. And, and I think I think about like when you're saying like, Ryan wanted to do it, was sort of on the, bench to do this. I'm like, wow, it's been so different of a book, and I've come to this sort of realization in, like, I don't know, maybe in the last year or so, that like, I think there's so much more of an advantage for people who live on the stylized cartoon side of comic books than the sort of mainstream, realistic side. And because the variety of opportunities that you can apply stylistic work to is far broader than straight, because it's very odd when you take a really good straight up comic book artist and you slap him into something that is not straight up superhero work. It feels that there's like a weird disconnect, because it's almost like, this is a kind of a mystical reality world, and why are these realistic people in it? Like, it has this kind of strange kind of vibe to it. And I think,
that's a good point. And I've been joking with Ryan, and that, like, it's a good thing I'm drawing this book instead of him. I love Ryan's work. He's one of the greats, one of the all-time greats. He'll be known as one of the greats of this generation of artists for sure. And his stuff is amazing, and I learn from it all the time. But I do think that, and I think also that Kenny and Ryan both played to my strengths when they kind of started reworking it. But there's humor in it, but there's also, I think, some darkness and some emotion, and I want everything to feel very expressive. And I think that's definitely something that my style lends itself to, maybe in a different way than Ryan's does. And so I do think that the book kind of, it feels sort of really tailor-made for what I'm interested in right now. Because I've gone through lots of different evolutions, and I plan to go through more. But right now I'm interested in action and expressiveness, and sort of, very wild designs and big effects and that kind of stuff. And so to have the opportunity with a book that has kind of the trimmings of a superhero comic, but these other elements thrown in that push it a little bit over the edge from what you're normally are used to expecting, and then being able to draw characters that look like Cirrus, which is sort of to me, feels like an exaggerated version of sort of the classic superhero. And then you have Roger, the original Roger, the short, rotund Roger, that I've sort of pushed the cartooning to make him feel a little bit outside of reality, but then still have background characters that feel much more like the real world. And that's, all those are elements that I love to see. One of the things that I never liked even when I was younger, when reading superhero comics, is how all the characters kind of look the same with just different haircuts or different costumes,
different colors.
Right. I never liked that. Whereas I like it. I like when I draw a page with Cirrus and Roger. Cirrus is 8 feet tall. He looks like he weighs 700 pounds, and Roger's 5'1", probably weighs
700 pounds.
right. 180, 200, something like that. And so I think that it's just been really fun for me to have the freedom to really push those differences, because with the theme of the book being about kind of the dichotomy between these two bodies and lifestyles and outlooks on life, anything to play those up, and then surround them with people that maybe feel more consistent in some ways, so that those differences can really start to shine, or I don't know if shine's the word, but really play off of each other in interesting ways.
Right. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think a lot of, we, and I'll put myself in the category of the mainstream comic, creator, in the terms, we're a product of the past, and the past was consistency. When the term house style is there for a reason. Like, in the 70s, they wanted everyone to draw like Jack Kirby. Like, can you make it look like Jack Kirby? Yeah. And then it became like, well, can you make it look like John Byrne or something? Like, they wanted a very consistent look to things. And then Jim Lee, of course. So, and I get that, because you're sort of playing to the majority, which may not be cognizant of the nuances between the work. Like, the work is secondary to the character. Like, cool, Wolverine, there's 5 different books with him this month. It doesn't matter who's drawing it, or it's just a story with Wolverine that I want to kind of dig into. Right. And we've all been in that place, as fans of whatever a thing is. We just want more of the thing we like. And it's the nature of it. But it would be, it's an interesting concept to think of, like, how you would have this comic book sort of landscape look if individuality was sort of like expressed, like, hey, just we're comfortable. We know the Avengers are awesome. Now you make it look the way you want it to look and make it look awesome.
Right. Well, it's crazy to me because even before I was doing this full time, I was self publishing, and I was very engaged with, and still am very engaged with, the indie comics and self published community, which is sort of what you're talking about in a way,
Yeah.
is like that's all people trying to do their very own specific thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go to those conventions, like Cake, you find just these, this great variety of types of people and the types of work they're making, the types of lines they're using, the types of tools they're using. And to me, it feels so invigorating, and it makes you see the possibilities of the medium. And at the same time, I'm not under any illusion. I know that I'm an outlier in the sense that with a lot of mainstream stuff, I know that a lot of it is looked at as it's a product and it's entertainment. And so consistency is important. Story is probably the most important thing. And I understand that timeliness is important and all those things. But at the same time, it's like when they do take those risks within the mainstream, those are the books that become the ones that
Legend.
everybody remembers and seeks out. I mean, that's how you get Dark Knights. That's how you get Silver Surfer Black. That's how you get, when you let the inmates run the asylum a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
it really, reinvigorates, I think, people's engagement with it. Where it's great to have a long storyline that you can follow and you see Wolverine or whoever across all these books. But, at the end of the day, I think you always need that little, I don't know what you call it, that little jump start again, that little something to be like, whoa, I never thought about this for the
Yeah.
character or for the style or for whatever. And so I'm always striving for that. It's probably not the best financial plan for my life, but it's definitely something that I can't avoid. I just I can't do it the other way. I've tried, and I just I lose engagement so quickly. And when
Right.
you're drawing for whatever 12 hours a day every
Yep.
day, if you're not loving it, then
It's so hard.
it's awful. It's
Yeah.
torture.
No, it is, it's brutal. And yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, the day is so long, your hand only has so much juice in it for the day. It is
Right.
really, really rough. Um, yeah. And it's so funny. Like I think back, to, I mean, think about how masterful and powerful Bill Sienkiewicz was in the realm for what he produced through Marvel. Like,
Hmm.
Moon Knight, taking it from his very Neil Adams, based, style to what we consider Bill Sienkiewicz. And then he moves off and goes The New Mutants, like, which was a cool book. But then it's like, hey, it's like, hey, we're going to replace, I think, Bob McLeod with, or I can't remember, I think it was Bob McLeod doing the artwork or something, with Bill Sienkiewicz. And it's just totally out there. And then amid all that, there's like this Kevin Nolan issue that
Oh
is
man.
there. And Kevin is like doing this reductive, semi-cartoony look to the whole thing.
Hmm.
And you're like, I mean, it was so far out there. I mean, I have to believe it was all Archie Goodwin. My theory is that Archie Goodwin he was a master of jujitsu or something, and he was just twisting everyone's arm in the editorial offices. Because how do you explain that? How do you explain this? Because it didn't look like anything else out there.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But those are the moments, I think, that those risks happen, and it invigorates, I think, the fan base just because they
Mm-hmm.
get to either love or hate something. And I
Sure.
think it invigorates other creators to see new possibilities, and
Yeah.
that helps the medium to not stagnate, and become
Mm-hmm.
sort of just bland. And you see this across any medium, I think, any medium that straddles art and entertainment. With film, it's the same thing. I mean, we're at this point now, I think, with a lot of action movies or a lot of superhero movies where they've become formulaic to a point where everybody can see that. And so
Right.
they're needing maybe some little injections of something different in there. And so I think we're going to start to see a lot of interesting things happen in that arena as well. And I think right now we're seeing it in comics. I think that there is a group of creators and books out there right now that are sort of tweaking things a little bit and pushing the envelope a little bit. And it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time to be making comics when there's artists like, like Trad Moore and Danny Warren Johnson and some of these creators that are just really pushing limits on what this
Mm-hmm.
market is used to seeing. So
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, it's, I don't know, earlier when you were talking about it, I was thinking about like how, the thing is that, like, it's like food, people are very comfortable with the food that they have available. This is why, McDonald's is so successful. It's the same thing wherever you go. And people get really hinky if you throw something different into the dish. They're like, what is this?
Hmm.
And it's like, so that's almost like when you add some sort of like unique art,
Yeah.
sort of offering into this run of whatever the comic book that everybody loves. And people go, wait, what is this? Is this going to make me sick? And, but meanwhile, you have a whole group of either, future artists or current artists looking at that going, oh my God, that's it. Like, that's the
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And we chase after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you absolutely do. You absolutely do. And that's, I'm always looking for that. If I'm at a show or if I'm in the shop, I want something to pop out and kind of give me pause to say, what are they doing here? How did they do that? Or where did this come from? And I'm never short of it in comics. I mean, the comics lie in this strange area between like comics. I'm not going to include movies and stuff because even though comic book movies are popular right now, we all know that's not forever. But like, there's this strange spot that comic books occupy where it's sort of like very separate from culture, but at the same time it kind of has its own culture. And I feel that it affords comics to kind of have these strange iterations that happen,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so many that come out, and they're so, I guess, cheap in a way. I mean, I'm not saying that in any kind of bad way, but just,
No.
there's something that thrives on iteration. You don't spend, most people don't spend 5 years making a movie or making a comic the way you might spend 5 years making a movie. And
Right.
so, you're constantly being pushed to invent. And like you and I know, and like we were talking about, like if you're sitting at the table all day, you kind of have to find something in there to kind of just get your juices going again. And or you have a bad day and you do something weird and you're like, oh well, that's kind of interesting, like what did I do
Totally.
there and how did that work? And the happy accidents is another thing I'm trying to get better at, being very open to, instead of controlling everything. If you're drawing, I don't know, 5 pages a week, you're going to have some mistakes and you can't go back and fix them all. And so part of it is not, I've noticed that most readers aren't going to look at them as mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
number one. And number two, maybe it's not about thinking that it's a mistake, but saying, okay, here's a new, twist in the road I'm on. How can I take that curve a little faster? Or how
Right.
can I stabilize after I've gone around that curve to kind of get back on track? And that's sort of when you're on the creative side of comics, I think that's something that you have to learn, like I'm learning to engage with,
Yeah.
and not being so obsessive over everything, which is sort of what I've been most of my life. I've been sort of an OCD person. And so finding that room for things to be, imperfect, but not imperfect in a way that they are lesser than, but imperfect in a way where there's like a joy in those sort of little happy accidents.
Yeah. And and it's I guess the terrible kind of feeling or trap with that is, you you got to stay on model. You got to make it through
Yeah.
the issue. You got to make it through the
Yeah.
run and make it consistent.
Yeah.
And that's a tough racket, because that's the job. And I remember, I talked to like, Wilfredo Torres, who like, he's like, I draw in the morning and the evening, like to warm up and to cool down. And that's my time to experiment. Like, I'm
Sure.
going to like, cause so if he sees a happy accident, he's going to go, look, I'm going to see if I can kind of recreate that or modify it or
Right.
develop it, because maybe you can make a new tool that you can break out of the next project. And like
Absolutely.
Sebastian Perez, um, he's, he has this amazingly cool style. Like, it's so fun, active, and all these things, but it's not in his regular comic book work because he's afraid. He's like, I don't think I don't know if they'll hire me to do this stuff. And I'm like, well, buddy, if you can pull off this throughout a book, everyone's going to want to buy it. But it's like,
Right.
so he's like building that arsenal, of how do I solve all these problems? Because as you said earlier, it's all the drawing you have to do. You have to do all this
Right.
drawing, and you have to make the cars, the backgrounds, every little bit has to fit in this world.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you're trying to do something new, you got to do it new for everything.
Yeah, it's like in the midst of an issue, you might have a little bit of that, but it's nice to find those ways, like you're saying, to explore that. For me, I try to make when I do commissions too as another way to kind of get some income, and those are a great place for me to play and to find some new way to do something. Like, what's another way I can distort something, or what's another way I
Mm-hmm.
can render something, or what's something like that. So commissions are that for me. And then the last 5 years or so, I've done the kind of the Inktober thing where I try to do an ink drawing every day. And usually I try to tell a story and I'll do like maybe a half a page a day of inks. And those have been another opportunity for me because there's a time constraint, but no stakes of like no one's paying me to do it. And
Right.
so I can just sort of see what happens. And so many kind of leaps for me personally in the work I make, I think happened on projects like my Inktobers or on certain commissions that I've done where I was like, whoa, like I found something, like
Yeah,
how can I take that and stick it into the next issue of the Schlub in a way that's gonna, meld in a little bit.
totally. Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, it's something. I think it's the same with, I mean, listen, it's the same for everything. A writer is going to come across a work and read it and be completely inspired by the narrative technique, the whatever it is, and go, oh man, I really want to bring that into what I'm doing. Now, if they're in the middle of writing a comic series, they can't exactly change, hey, I'm going from a first person here to a third person
Right.
limited, like that's gonna, not gonna fly. But it's this interesting thing where you have to kind of develop all those tools in avenues. So you write short stories or you write a comic book. You try to do things to get those muscles, you know, strong so you can actually
Yeah.
pull it off when you actually need to do it.
Right. Right. Yeah, and you got to find time to play too. I think if you're going to continue to grow in whatever creative field you're in, I think you have to find those moments of play and no stakes. Because one thing that I didn't realize would happen when I started drawing comics full time is that I stopped drawing for fun a lot, and because you're
Totally.
like every moment of my drawing energy has to go into this, and by the time you're done, there's a lot of times like my neck hurts, my hand hurts, I can't stare at a page anymore. And so I've been getting better this last year at finding that little bit of time, whether that be a quick cool down drawing or a drawing on the weekend, in the morning before my family's awake, or just something to, usually more like at night after everyone's asleep, but just something to put some expression down on paper and remember the joy of just mark making and the
Right.
joy of just expressing and without a specific goal in mind, narratively.
I immediately said, like, what would I do? I would probably join a D&D group so I could play D&D once a week so I could have this excuse time to sit there and draw in a sketchbook while I'm playing.
Yep, yep, yep. I mean, when I do my live streams, it's big part of that is just like that's just drawing for fun, and
Right.
I tell myself that because you're going to be interacting with people and stuff, and so but again, it's like finding that way that it can feel like it's separate from the the well, the money A, the schedule B, and then sort of the pressure C. It's
Right.
just it's a freedom.
And that's the thing. I think when we have to figure out what our motivations are in life, like the first thing you said there is if you can detach the financial aspect of it and then examine the motivation, you can then know whether this is the right thing for you or the wrong thing for you, like whatever the action is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I kid you not, like I'd say probably every other month I have this sort of like, why am I doing this podcast? Like, because I got to edit this thing. I got to put some graphics together. I got to, upload it. Like there's some time that's spent in the process, but then I have conversations with people and I'm like, well, I do it because it's like it's such like a recharge for my own battery
Yeah.
to hear somebody who's doing something which may not even be close to what I'm doing. I mean, if I'm talking to a colorist or even an artist, I don't sit at a drawing table and draw all day long. But when you say certain things, I'm like, oh, that's
Right.
yeah, okay, yeah.
There's a commonality, I think, in all creative fields, and I think when you find that, I have friends. I'm very fortunate to have friends that do a lot of different creative things, and musicians. And my wife's a jeweler. That's her table over there.
Oh,
She makes
cool.
jewelry. and I have friends that are musicians and friends that are film directors and friends that are sculptors and video game designers, and it's just like when you sit down with them and just have a conversation, there's a lot of these commonalities between, finding sort of where your engagement is and how you make decisions, and where your struggles are, and how each different art form iterates in a different way. Because I think that it's the same way for people that don't do creative things. I think everyone should try to do something creative, honestly.
Mhm.
Everybody, anything, because I think that you start to realize that it gets you out of that mindset that this is some sort of unattainable magic thing, or people use that dirty word like, "Oh, you're just so talented." I'm like,
Talented. Yeah.
well, I do this every day. It's not like I just popped out of the womb and I could draw. It's like, sure,
Right.
maybe some people have a natural inclination towards certain types of things, right?
Sure.
But you're not going to be great unless you work at it, And
Right.
and I think that I think it helps you when you hear someone else talk. Like if I hear a musician talk about how they write a song, it makes me appreciate it even more. I appreciate the music even more because I see what goes into it, and I
Mhm.
always hope that I always encourage everyone to try to do something creative, even if it's a weekend pottery class or a writing class or screen printing or learn to play guitar, because it enhances, I think, the overall experience of not just other artworks, but your own life
Yeah.
gets richer when you find out that you can express things and you can make things that you think are beautiful or ugly or whatever it is that you're trying to get out of your soul or whatever you want to call it.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I get it, and you're right in what you said so much earlier about this being the golden age. Like for comic books, like this is the time that people are putting in this country the widest variety of works ever,
Yeah.
and the level of overall talent is super high. It's, I mean, it's really quite impressive, and not saying that like there wasn't a great level of talent making comic books for Marvel and DC in 1984. There was,
Sure. Right.
but they were making that kind of comic book. They weren't
Right.
making a wider variety of of
Right.
stories and genres. So um, it's breathtaking.
It's fun. It's fun. So do you how do you engage with comics nowadays? Is it mostly as a reader? Do you feel, how do you feel your, like, what's your connection with comics now? I'm curious.
Well, okay, I guess three factors. I guess first off, there's a great nostalgia aspect of it for me
Hmm.
as a lifelong fan of the of comic books, and I still have all these things that I love. So I'm always willing to go and look back at the things that I love. But then I get to talk to a lot of people doing new stuff, so I'm exposed to so much that I've never. Oh, I had no idea. I didn't know what this was, or I did, or someone says, "Hey, did you ever read this?" I'm going, "Oh, I didn't read that," and I go hunt it down and I find it, and I'm like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" And like, I mean, you were talking about Daniel. Like, I really wasn't aware of his work until this last year. I knew who he was. I'd heard his name, but I wasn't like a reader of his work. So I've bought a bunch of his stuff and I read it. I'm like, oh, okay. Like I get it. Like I see why people are doing it. I would put him in that category of Sienkiewicz, someone who is doing something at a level that is moving the industry in a direction
Yeah.
through their work.
Yeah.
Like what he does, people are going, I want to do something like that. Not his style and not his story, but they want to do something because he's doing
Right.
that. And
Right.
Bill changed the industry where people are like, we can paint these things. Okay, I'm going to paint some comics.
Yeah.
Um, and then also I'm making comic books too. So, and I'm not on a frequency level, but like I wrote a story that we did through the podcast a couple of years ago. So I had a bunch of creators like Nick Hagnetti was one of them. And a few other people, and like we did a comic book, and it was like so I wrote a story, and everybody did this cool artwork, and we put it out there, and then and I'm also editing a couple of comic books for people because the biggest thing like people who are doing indie comics are missing is an eye that's
Yeah.
objective and looking
Yep.
at it to say, hey, this something's missing, or you're breaking your back here for something that's not working, like all these
Right.
kinds of
Right.
elements. Wow.
Right. Right. That's cool. So it's interesting because, it seems like you've had the opportunity to engage with it in so many different ways. And so, like, the idea of helping with something like as an editor seems kind of ideal because it allows sort of you to apply technical knowledge, but also just historical knowledge, right? Of
Hmm.
all these different things. And since you're also a creative person, that gives you a better understanding of what it means when you give that feedback. I think a lot of
Right.
people, they give feedback, don't understand. I've had very few bad experiences with writers or collaborators, but usually a big crux of the bad experience is that they ask for things without really understanding what it is they're asking for, or make
Hmm.
suggestions without any sort of historical reference. And so sometimes it can be a little maddening when someone's like, "Oh, you just need to change this character's hair on every page." And you're like, "Well, I already drew those pages, man. I wish we would have caught that a little sooner, or
Right.
whatever." But at the same time, like, there's moments where you could say something as simple as like, "Hey, have you thought about this moment in this panel removing the word balloon because it
Hmm.
reads fine as it is?" Or, "Did you think
Yeah.
about adding a word balloon because I'm unclear about what's happening here?" Those are the kind of things that can take a work from being like okay to being like really good.
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid, um, Super Friends was like the jam. Watching that on Saturday mornings. And the one thing that bothered me about the cartoon was, and it's the same example I use over and over again, is on screen is Aquaman swimming to the bottom of the ocean and grabbing, let's say, a giant anchor. But the voiceover goes, as Aquaman swims to the bottom of the ocean and picks up a giant anchor. And I'm like, we see this. Like, so at that moment, I understood the difference between like showing and not telling
Right.
as a storyteller. So it's that removal balloon. Like, I'm one of the books that I'm editing is a first time writer, long time artist. And there are these balloons that don't need to be there because the
Yeah.
visuals are telling the story. But the writer, lots of new writers also think like, well, I got to write something. You don't
Yeah.
have to. You wrote
Yep.
something. That's what's on the page. Now you get to actually add some narrative and dialogue that to enhance the experience.
Right. Right. And it's such a dance with comics
Hmm.
between, you know, the word balloons, the narration, the onomatopoeias, the paneling, the look of the characters. And when the dance is really flowing, you don't notice, and you're just kind of pulled through it. But then there's those moments where I don't know. I think there's this one. I remember this. I saw this one comic. It was like an old John Cassaday comic, and there's like a gunfight going on, and there's like 100 guys shooting at each other, but every single little gun has a POW next to it, and it's like, oh boy, like this is a little excessive. I think the little muzzle flash is reading that just fine, but it's like little things like that make the medium so like I'm never bored with it. No matter which way I'm engaging with it, there's these little moments and these little parts that just can be tweaked and turned and kind of you can always make it a little bit better. The hard part sometimes is letting go.
Hmm.
I get something back from Mike or I get back something back from John. I'm always like I always want to tweak everything just and it's like it's all good, but it's like just a little bit this way maybe. And sometimes you do have to step back, but that's the fun part though is really getting in there with everybody and saying, well, how can we make this just look like a really gelled thing?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the one great advantage of, the majors, if we want to call them that, is that there's an editor and there's a deadline. And the bottom line is you someone's going to come and take that artwork away from you. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
going to no longer be in your control. So,
Yeah.
on the independent level, it's real tough because you can round the corner of something forever. Like, you
Yep.
can round the corner of a circle till you have a dot. Like, it is just the nature of the creative cycle.
I've been there, man. That's
Yeah.
something I'm getting myself off of that, and trying to surround myself with people that are more used to the kind of work I'm trying to make right now and taking their advice of like, hey, just leave it. That's
Hmm.
fine how it is. It's gonna work fine. No
Yep.
one's gonna think it's bad. And you're gonna draw the other thing I try to remind myself, you're gonna draw a lot more drawings, man. Like every
Yeah.
single one of them cannot be the last drawing you ever do. You have to think of it as it, iterations in a series of sort of your progression, as a visual creative,
Mm-hmm.
And also trust that the other team members are bringing something to the table that enhances it as well. And so, maybe something isn't exactly perfect, but then I hand it off to Mike, and Mike finds some way to make it just perfect. That
Yeah.
he makes it perfect, or then we hand it off to John, and he finds a way to kind of make that perfect, or
Yep.
or work a lot better. And that's the fun thing, that transitioning from being a sole creator on most of my past work to being a collaborator. That's something I've actually grown to really enjoy and really love, is that it's a team sport, and everybody is contributing, the best they can to the project. And so what you end up with is something that has more positive elements than you could have brought to the table on your own. And it makes the work feel a lot more fresh. So when you have those long days of creating, you get some color pages back and like, oh wow, these actually look really cool. Like I'm excited again. And then the books come in the mail and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is incredible. And then you get to hear what people say about it. And so the hard part is like where I've been the last year, where I've been drawing stuff I can't show anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really excited for it to be out there. I mean, if people love it or hate it, either way, at least I'll know, that it's got some sort of life beyond me. Because it is easy to sort of, I think it's important too to talk to other people, whether that be in the context of something like this, or friends you share a studio with or a phone call with, because you get in your own head a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And for me, that was always a challenge. It's still a challenge for me. I've struggled with anxiety and depression for a lot of my life. And I think that if you cut yourself off and you put all of your self-worth into the page you're drawing right now, it can be really bad for your mental health. And so
Oh
I've been
yeah.
trying to encourage other people too, but especially myself, to you got to talk to other creatives, and you got to share, and you got to find out other ways to get invigorated other than just your own ideas,
Mm-hmm. Well, outside of your being in contact with a sort of a regular group of people while you're working through your week, what are the other things you do to try to mitigate that buildup of anxiety, for this? Because perfection was the enemy of progress. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
that's so, and I think a lot of people who make stuff can identify with that. So what do you like? What are the things you do to try to make that not a problem?
Um, I'm working on getting, I quit my job, and then within 3 months of me quitting my job, we got pregnant, and it was like not totally planned, like halfway planned, it was kind of like,
Okay.
oh yeah, we should have a baby sometime. And then we were pregnant. And then right after the baby was born, the pandemic stuff sort of kicked off. And so I think I got really stuck in sort of this insulated kind of, you know, routine.
Mm-hmm.
And also I felt this pressure to make stuff and work all the time, because I have a child to provide for and everything. And so, I was just constantly under pressure. And it got to a point where I kind of hit my breaking point. And
Yeah.
I finally sought out the help that I needed. And so, one thing that was a big part of it was yeah, engaging with therapy, and going to therapy, and finding a way to talk about that kind of thing with
Mm-hmm.
somebody, and talking about things that weren't just my work, right? And then the other part of it was actually making the effort. Whereas I think before, I would find ways to engage with things I liked and see friends just naturally. I think once all that happened and I felt this pressure, and kind of the weight of how much drawing it is to do comics hit me, I kind of just stopped seeing friends. I stopped going out. I stopped taking time to play video games. I stopped
Right.
all that. And so what I've been doing is trying to put those things on a calendar in a sacred way. So,
Mm.
for example, on Sundays, there's my closest group of friends, which includes my younger brother and a couple other guys. We get on a call, and we all watch the same movie together and talk while we watch it. And
Oh, cool.
we generally watch bad movies and horror movies and things like that. And that's a thing that I never ever ever miss.
Mm-hmm.
Well, unless of course like death in the family or something, those kind of things, right? But like I make that something that's like, it doesn't matter how I'm feeling, I'm gonna be there.
Mm-hmm.
And 10 times out of 10, it's a positive thing that I did that. And then I've been trying to do other things now that things are sort of feeling a little more normal. Like, I'm going to go draw somewhere else for the day, or I'm going to
Okay.
go meet up with a friend with the sole purpose of hanging out with them. It doesn't have to be for business. It doesn't have to be for something else. I'm just going to get together with them and hang out and talk. And then the other thing I'm trying to get better at is, I read comics now. I don't read them as much as I used to in the sense of going to the store and having a giant pull list,
Hmm.
but I try to seek out the ones that I've always wanted and then really engage with the ones that I've always appreciated. And so I try to have, at least once or twice a week, a time where I sit down and just spend time with an artist edition or an art book, or go through, say, a run of a comic and really just really look at it and really
Yeah.
find the things that bring me joy from it. So I've been just sitting over this Michael Golden, artist edition, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 times since I got it. Kid goes to bed, I come in here, turn the lights off except for my studio light, and I just look
Hmm.
at it. Or, I just recently I pulled out a bunch of my Aaron Weisenfeld comics, because those are
Dude,
very few, but I love
yes.
them. And so I pulled them out and I was like, I'm just going to look at Aaron Weisenfeld for a
Oh my
while. And
God.
it makes a big difference.
Oh.
So yeah.
I talked to him 2+ years ago. I was like, you want to come on? You want to come on and talk? He's like, no, I don't want to. He doesn't want to talk about comics anymore.
I know. And that, that's
And I
great for
get
him.
it.
And I like his fine art stuff. I
I
think it's
love
great.
his paintings. Yes,
But man, oh man,
I
he
know.
made some just amazing comics. I mean, he's definitely in that same wheelhouse as a Golden and a Pearson, but he's got his own version of that. And that Team 7 miniseries, the Wolverine Death Blow. And then I was just
Hmm.
looking at those 2 short stories in Wildstorm. They're just black and white of Death Blow fighting some crazy guy. They're incredible. And it's
Yeah,
like, I need to know who has those pages, because I need to see them in real life. That stuff blows me away. And so, like, that's the thing that excites me.
yeah,
And but yeah, it's like finding time to have a life again. And I think that when I got really sucked into this being my job and the pressure of it, I stopped having a life. And so I'm
yes,
trying to go to the movies again, go
sure,
out to eat, like do something that is, there's no purpose other than I enjoy this, and like
yeah.
letting myself enjoy it.
And this is a good summer for going to movies. Like, there's been a bunch of really good ones to go check out, and yeah, we were pretty avid film goers, and then the pandemic hit. They
Yeah.
stopped letting us go to movies, and then
Yeah.
we fell out of the habit. So this
Yeah.
year, like, my wife has been like, "Hey, let's go to the movies. Let's go to the movies." I'm like, "All right, cool." Like,
Yeah. I'm trying to
yeah,
get back to it. I was a rabid movie goer
right,
before. I mean, I was a member of different movie theaters, especially the art house stuff, and I was at the
hmm,
theater like once a week at least.
yeah,
And then I would also go to two or so concerts every month, like musical concerts, and I haven't been to any since the
wow,
pandemic happened. I have 2 coming up finally,
all right,
but those were the things that kind of have taken a hit, and part of it is the pressure of working, part of it's just money is tight, and
sure,
part of it is just like the time and energy that goes into having a kid, especially in these first few years of their life. She's 3 now, and 3.5, and sometimes I might have an hour or 2 at the end of the day, but you're just like, I'm going to sit on the couch because I cannot even move anymore.
yeah.
It's a lot bringing up kids, and that's a joy too. It's not a bad thing. I mean,
No, no,
she's
but it's
incredible and inspiring, but it sucks the energy out of you.
it is. It's, I mean, listen, having a child is having a job, and and it becomes your first and most important job in your life when you have one. So it shuffles your schedule, in a fashion that is not in a negative. It's just, this is more important. Like, we've all had problems in our life happen, and when these
Sure.
problems happen, for some reason, we're really capable of dropping everything and going to be there for somebody who's, like, if somebody's had a death in the family, or if you had it,
Right.
like, everything doesn't, you just handle it and you take care of business.
Right.
um and that's like, a kid is that thing, but it's doesn't stop. It stays, it stays going. So you have to kind of shift your whole, your life around. um
Yeah, it's been a learning process, and
I'll
and I
bet.
don't, I think the thing that my wife and I had a problem, I think, letting go of early on was that, like, it's not going back. Like, there's nothing's going back to how it was ever before. So
Hmm.
what you need to do is start to find the new opportunities for joy and for experiences that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't had a kid. And it's been definitely feeling more like that, especially once she turned like 3 and started having a lot of personality and stuff. You realize, like, I'm in that phase now that I think all parents get to eventually. We're like, what was I like before I had a kid? Like, what was life like before this? Like,
Sure.
nothing makes sense without this. Like, this is life, so yeah, it's like there's lots of ups and downs, and I think there was this romanticized part of me that thought when I quit my job I would just be this you know mercenary comic book artist that just only did that and was like the best and like all these
Right.
things. And I realized even before we had the kid that just doing that one thing all the time is like it's not good. It's not good to just do one thing all the time. Like, you don't,
Right.
your life starts to suck really quick and get boring really quick, and then the work starts to suffer, and then it's just this bad feedback loop. You have to have other influences and other activities you do, and so that's another big goal for me, is that to find a new hobby again. And I think that once my kid is she's been more and more into school, and she's going to start kindergarten and stuff. I'm excited to have a hobby again. I used to play video games a lot. I never play them anymore. And I used to do music a little bit, and I never do that anymore. And so I'm excited to kind of get my hobby horse going again. Cause
Yeah.
that when I do engage with those things, it, like we are talking about, it's just like talking to people in other fields. I think engaging with things outside of your expertise,
Hmm.
that maybe you're not great at, they really push you to kind of, you know, not be so hard on yourself, and to not think that there's sort of some sort of perfect goal you're going to hit in your career of like, oh, I've mastered everything and everybody thinks I'm the best and I can do whatever I want. Like, that's not really what happens anyway. know?
No, no, I think that's a very small room full of nobody, in that respect. I think it might be, we may think that there is this place to achieve and attend, but it's not there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, yeah. I mean, I can relate to all that. I remember having really bad like issues about, like, I would leave my apartment and I would go out and I would be constantly thinking about, like, oh man, like I'd be worried about going out because I was worried that I would miss that moment of like inspiration, that the
Absolutely.
the great stuff would happen. And
Yep. Yep.
it was really weird because you could be aware of it. You could be like this isn't probably good, right? You could say that, in your head, but it was very hard to kind of not have that sort of omnipresent sense in your, in the back of your head, just kind of ruining a lot of stuff at times. Yeah.
Right. Like, you have to take a vacation from yourself and
Hmm.
from your job, and sort of just be like, I'm not thinking about that right now.
Right.
And I just got back from a little short weekend family trip with my family, and I like I was mentioning before, I didn't work at all, and there was
Hmm.
a moment of panic when I got back, but at the same time, I was like, man, it's kind of a relief to just,
Yeah.
especially with the book coming out this week, and all the other things that have been going on in my life, just to have a moment of none of that was really, it was really nice, and it's like you fight it and you fight it and fight it, but once you're there and once okay, yeah, I
Hmm.
feel a little refreshed.
Yeah. We're going, well, my wife's actually already out in Colorado, but I'm flying out there on Wednesday. So that would be tomorrow for listeners. And it's one of these things where I'm like, oh God, like I have all this work to do. I have all this work to do. Um, I got a kill fee over the weekend, which is great. So one of those projects went away. So I'm like, all right, that's good. One less thing to do. But it's just this whole sort of freak out thing. And I'm supposed to be contacting agents to get an agent to sell this book. And my wife
Right.
was like, so what's going on with that? I'm like, I'm hoping that magic of going away on vacation thing happens, where you can actually think about your life and go,
Yeah.
okay, I can attack this problem now. Like, I know
Right.
what I need to do. Here are the steps. You write them down, and then you take
Right.
care of them when you come back.
Right.
Um,
You get outside of it a little bit, and you feel
mhm.
like, okay, it's not on top of me anymore. It's over there, and I can look at it and kind of see it. Whereabouts in Colorado are you headed?
We're going, going out to Salida first, which is like a kind of cool small town on
Yeah.
the Arkansas River,
Yeah.
and then heading up to Dillon, which is up in Summit County.
Hmm. Hmm. My family lives in Colorado, and we're
Okay.
actually they're in the southeastern corner, small towns, so
Yeah.
Pueblo, Rocky Ford, La Junta, that kind of
Hmm.
area. And I used to live in LA, so I would drive through Salida all the time
Oh,
between
cool.
Colorado and LA. So I know that area very well. It's really pretty.
It's great. It's really great.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I'm looking forward to, just get some like mountain hiking in and
yeah, yeah,
get away from everything for a little while. Like, you know, like I was just talking to myself. I'm like, you don't have to write every day. You don't have to sit and bang out,
yeah,
1,000 words every day. If you get
yeah.
some time, do a little writing, but don't
Right,
feel obliged to bust your neck.
right, right. Let
Yeah.
it not feel like work for a little bit, and then when it
Yeah.
is work again, it doesn't feel like work as much anymore, and it feels fun
Right.
again. It's respite or whatever. It's like this like again, it's like you take it away from being something that has all of your self-worth tied to it, and you let it be this amazing thing that you are fortunate enough to engage with, right? Like
Hmm.
no, a lot of people would love to write comics every day or draw
Right.
comics every day. I mean, I was one of those people for years. I was like, I just want to draw comics all day. And you get caught up in it once you're doing it, and you start to find the bad parts of it or the parts you don't like about it. But I always try to take those breaks to remind myself, like, oh, like this is pretty cool. This is pretty
Sure.
neat. Like this is really fun, and like this is a ride I have not been on before, and now I get to go on this ride.
Yeah, it is. I mean, listen, it's a great fortune and privilege for anybody who is able to make their way in their living without having to be in somebody else's office on their clock.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it is, but it's a lot of work, and it's your own thing, and the responsibility really does fall on you as the individual to maintain your sense of sanity at
yeah.
all turns, because there is nobody punching in and punching out the day. You really have to do it all. And
It's a lot. I would say that's the thing that it was a cliche that I heard, but fully understand now. Like my old job was way easier than this. I was like 100 million times easier than this. And I thought I worked hard then. I work way harder now.
yeah.
And, uh, and not only is that you're working harder because you're doing everything yourself, but also anytime you got reassurance from your old boss or your old coworkers or your old employees before, you're not getting those reassurances constantly anymore. And
Yeah.
so it's a whole nother kind of mental state that you find yourself in, and it's great. It's great, but it's like I try. At some point you realize the reality of it, and then you find ways to sort of you know uh live through that.
Hmm.
Like I said, I mean, it's easy when I had my day job and you get performance reviews and raises and everybody, oh, you're doing great, and it's really easy to feel like, oh yeah, I'm doing great, and whereas now I draw 6 issues of a comic and nobody's even seen it yet. It's
Right.
like I don't know if I'm doing good or not. We'll find
Right.
out.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's because it's not real time. It is so not real
No,
time, and it is.
no,
Yeah. I mean, boy, man. Anything of a creative project which is in a production line takes forever. You could
yeah,
spend a year or two writing a novel, and it's still going to be a year or two before that novel gets on the shelves. So
yep,
there is no patting on the back. You just get these moments of people, you know, you get your fellow writers who've read stuff going, "Hey, that's
right,
great," or you get your
right,
beta readers going, "Oh, we really love this," or
right,
whatever. The agent's like, "Oh, I can't wait to sell this," or we got a
right,
deal. Any of those
right.
things. These are your perks along the way, but you're still sitting in limbo because it's
Hmm.
not until it's
Hmm.
out there and somebody says, "I'm going to take my hard-earned money and time and trade, and spend it on this." It's a really different thing. So being in the comic industry is the same thing. It's just a bit shorter timeline, unless you're Jason Copeland, who spent 5 years making a comic book.
Jeez. Well, the book looks great though.
It's amazing. I really can't wait for it to come in. It's going to be so fun to read. It's going to be a blast. So are you, a million questions. Okay. Are you writing your own things? I mean, you were doing your own comic books, but now you're in the sort of, the bigger light of, other publishers. Are you writing stuff, preparing things to write stuff? What's the what's happening?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I always try to have a few different things, at least if nothing else, a few different things bouncing around in my head. But if I can
Hmm.
have them in other states of goings on, that's always a good thing. And so um, before I started this, and actually before I did the first Beef Bros, I had been working on a science fiction story called ERIS with my younger brother, and I've done 2 issues of it, and the third issue is the last issue, and
Okay.
it's just sort of been on hold. And so as I was working on this, I was finishing writing that with him, and then I started thumbnailing that. And so anytime I'm going to have a lull here, I'll probably try to dive into that and kind of wrap that up, because I would really like to just have that story complete and have it be another item in my library of work. And
Hmm.
then the other thing that I'm always sort of trying to figure out is I think I want to try to keep doing this Inktober challenge, and whatever people want to call it or however they feel about all that, I don't care. The idea of doing a book or a story or some drawings in the course of a month every day, I'm going to continue to do that. And so I've been sort of toying around with the different ideas of what this year's will be. So in the past years, I've done some fan comics and some, but I've also done some more kind of experimental type comics, and I've done just portraits. And this year I'm trying to sort of zero in on what it is. So I've got maybe 3 or 4 different options I've been bouncing around in my head and talking to people about. Um, and then, kind of just in the strictly professional realm, I'm always bumping my other contacts to just be like, if you got anything out there that would be
Yeah.
interesting, especially an issue of the X-Men, or some kind of image covers or something like that. I mean, I'm always looking for that kind of thing. But yeah, mostly Eris, and then this Inktober stuff is my next sort of like thing. If the SCHLUB continues to kind of go on and be, hopefully as successful as we hope it to be, that'll probably, keep rolling indefinitely. But yeah, I mean, I'll probably try to finish up my thing, and then there's a group of writers that I've worked with in the past that I'm always open to working with again. So I'm always talking to Seth, Jacob, and Aubrey Sitterson, and Matt Mare Lowry, and Kenny, and
Hmm.
anytime I can get something going with those guys. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a, it's like being an air control, air traffic controller. Like,
yeah, yeah,
you have to like set like all these things in the long distance, and like put them up there. And then you got to figure out how you can time them so they can land, sequentially, not
yeah.
concurrently.
Right.
So you have some sort of breathing room.
You do your best, but
Oh
they
yeah.
always end
No.
up crashing on the runway together. Because
Right.
it's just crickets for so long. You know how it is, and then all
Oh
of a
yeah.
sudden, 5 people say yes, and you're just like, I have to find a way to make this work.
Right.
Or you're like, all right, I signed this deal, and this is going to take me through the rest of the year, and then it falls apart. I've had a couple situations like that just, and then you hadn't, maybe you didn't have anything lined up, or maybe the thing you
Right.
had lined up, because you said no to it initially, they went some other direction, and so now
Hmm.
that's not on the table anymore. And
Yep.
it's definitely a juggling act. And as an anxious control freak, that has been a big learning curve for me, to kind of just be able to go with the flow a little bit more. And obviously you're trying to find work and you're trying to do your best work, but on some level there's just things that are outside of your control, and projects that will take longer, or the funding will fall through, or whatever it is. And so I've been trying to get a little bit better at that. And that's why when I do have backup stuff, I try to make it first and foremost my projects, because I know what I want to accomplish with those. And I
Hmm.
sort of know how to do that because I've done it before. And so that's always like, okay, if I've got at least one of my own books in the hopper, I at least know I won't be lacking something to work on. Whether or not it's bringing in money is the other part of it. But like, I'll have something to work on that I care about.
That's
So
cool. Yeah. But I haven't spoken to Aubrey. He probably doesn't even remember me, but I think he was like the assistant to the assistant editor. Like he was like really low on the totem pole at Marvel back in the day, early 2000s. And I was going up to go talk to, Tom. Why am I blanking on Tom's last name right now? Tom Brevoort. And Mike Martz was Tom's assistant editor at the time. And I was going to go in their office, and I think Aubrey was the one who answered the door. Like I was like, I had to come in and like go to, like, when you get the elevator, walk down a hallway. There's nothing there, but you know, we'll hit the button and someone will come and get you. And it was Aubrey.
he's a riot. He'd be a fun
Yeah.
one to have on. He's he's got a lot of energy. And I think that
Yes.
when I first started working with him, I think that was a good counterbalance for me. I'm kind of a low key guy, and to have someone who is just brimming with excitement was very refreshing for me
Yeah.
and very invigorating.
Yeah. He's like just full of high octane and going. I love it. So are you doing your work traditionally or digitally? How are you, like, is it a combo?
Yeah, it's sort of a combo. I
Okay.
At some point, right around the time I quit my day job, I started incorporating drawing on the iPad a little bit for my thumbnailing and layouts. And so I generally will do my thumbnails and layouts on an iPad, and I just use Procreate. It does
Mm-hmm.
pretty much everything anybody could possibly want, honestly, and it's cheap. And so I do the thumbnails on there, and depending on the page, sometimes I will do a little more detailed stuff on there for things like if I need to do a perspective grid, or if I'm drawing uh, a character I've never drawn before, I might develop them a little further in the digital form. And then I print that up onto Bristol in Blue Line, and then I
Mm-hmm.
do my pencils and inks over that, and then it
Yeah.
comes back in through the scanner. And then, so that's generally how I work. Even before I had the iPad, I was doing sort of a weird thing where I would in my sketchbook draw different moments from the book or panels, and then I would end up kind of compositing them
Yeah.
digitally, and then I would print that out and then trace it onto the paper. And because I would always the thing that's the hardest for me, I think for most people, is sort of those layouts and sort of getting the storytelling down and the flow of the overall issue. And the advantages of doing a lot of that stuff digitally, just I really enjoy, even though I don't particularly like drawing digitally.
Mm-hmm.
Like the act of it is not as fun for me. I will say though, before I would do a Wacom, and then I had a tablet for a little while, and I would use those for coloring or layouts a little bit. But once I got the iPad, it felt a lot more natural and easier
Okay.
for me to draw. But the way I think about it is I use that as sort of a tool to make that process go a little smoother. But the thing that I enjoy the most and where I want to spend most of my time is on paper. That's if I'm not doing that, it's kind of like we were talking about. I'm like, that's the part I enjoy. I want to
Yeah.
try to spend as much time on that as possible. So all the pages for SCHLUB are printed blue line, but then pencil and ink over it.
Okay.
And I love having original art. I love buying original art. I love selling original art. I love the idea that people can have that intimacy with it on another level past the book itself. So I always try to have originals with me at shows and sell them, and I'll be dropping the art for the SCHLUB when it comes out, and I'm really excited about all that.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I always say, like, if I had to do comic books now for a living, I would do it digitally. But if someone said, "Hey, you don't have to worry about money, for a year, and you can do a comic book of your own," I would do it all traditionally.
Yeah, I mean it's fun, and there's advantages to digital, and I color my own work when I do my own books, and I
Mm-hmm.
color digitally. I color on the iPad mostly,
Right.
and then a little bit of Photoshop in there. But part of it is also like I've been drawing on paper since I can remember,
Mm-hmm.
and so I could get more proficient with digital, of course, right? I mean, anybody could, but I don't have a strong desire to be 100% digital and be proficient with it. And there's just things that happen on paper that, for me, again, that it's not just where the joy is, but it's also, I just think, where my skills excel a little bit. Um, and it sometimes bothers me because I would be a lot faster and probably a lot cheaper if I was digital,
Mm-hmm.
but then I would also be sacrificing the joy of drawing on paper and also the additional income of selling originals and
Yeah.
doing the commissions, which nowadays is not bad if you can get people to pick up the pages.
Yeah. If you have a fan base that wants to collect your artwork, it's an amazing stream of revenue. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I love inking with a brush. I haven't done it in a long
Yeah,
time, but
Zen.
there is nothing more like really doing it in my mind
Yeah,
than having a brush fat with ink, and it's going to go do the job, and you have to, like, handle that Bronco the whole time.
I mean, I get excited just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like that's the magic for me is just making the marks and looking at them and feeling the ink on the paper. And, that's worth the low pay, the long hours, the sore neck. Like there's something magical there. And that's the drug I'm always chasing, is like those experiences of the actual act of making it, but then doing something that, that you have in front of you and you're like, whoa, like this is like, this happened, and,
Mhm.
like that's the drug you're chasing. I mean, most of the time you're just frustrated and you're not getting what you want and yada yada yada.
Right.
But like when you hit that perfect moment of just you're flowing, it's the middle of the night and the ink's flowing, the pages are looking great, you're feeling happy. I mean, nothing else compares to it.
No, I mean, it's an amazing feeling. It's this sort of elation, terror, all kind of mixed up, rolled up into one thing. It's this real kind of interesting roller coaster. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I say I miss it because it's so bloody hard, but I love the memory of it. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I'm not to the point of hating it yet. And
No, not
honestly, I think,
hatred. Yeah,
well, sure, right.
I'm
But
old.
I'm not, for me, yeah. But I think that, I definitely do, right now I'm all in on kind of doing superhero stuff.
Yeah.
But I know that in my future there'll be another turn that I take with it, where I try to do something different, because that's what I love about it,
Mhm.
is that there's so much room in this medium of comics to do so many different kinds of things. And I would hate to limit what I could experience, in making different kinds of work. And so, right now I'm just obsessed with action, muscles, and punching, and
Yeah.
superheroes and all that. But I did a serial killer book before, and I did some kind of weird esoteric sci-fi book before, and I did autobio before, and like I see more of that in my future too. And and
Hmm.
and so part of it, and you've probably done this too, it's like working on different genres and working with different people. That keeps it exciting, so that the grind part of it sometimes feels like less of a grind. Like I said, you find those collaborators that inspire you, or you find another thing I do a lot is I'll change up my tools. Like, what's a new pen I can try, or
Yes. Oh my
what's a
God,
new
that's the
paper
best.
size I can work with, or something like
Mhm.
that.
That's a huge thing. I mean, for anybody who is struggling with the process of becoming an artist, um, there is nothing will get you to another level of creativity faster than changing the tool out, because the gray matter has to recontextualize how you solve this problem with this
Yeah,
new thing in your hand.
right, right,
Huh.
right. You want to get to the point where it's all just tools that can be used for whatever their purpose is through,
Right.
and you sort of are a conduit with the tool, through there to sort of do it. And so that's been really fun. And that's another advantage of talking to other creative people, especially other people who draw, is like, my favorite thing to do is I'll go to a show and I love to just pour through people's portfolios and be like, what did you do right here? And how did
Right.
you do that? And like, what were you using for this? And man, it's so much fun to have those conversations. I mean, I love to have those kind of conversations, because it's like, I used to play sports and stuff, and, just playing basketball with somebody and figuring out different ways that you could run an offense, or put a spin on the ball that's going to give you a different sort of result, and those kind of things. It's fun to talk shop. I
Hmm.
love talking shop, and you obviously love talking shop.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's it's funny you're saying about going through other people's stuff and rummaging through their box at the convention, but what's really funny is that when you're young, you see the other person's tool as the answer,
Yeah.
and when you get older, you don't see the tool as the answer, you see the tool as another option.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's so like it's the best. It's like so
Yeah.
cool when you get to that point.
That's very astute, because I feel 100% that's the way I was. And you go up to someone's table and you see what they do and you love it. And we all love so many different kinds of artists. And that's when it got confusing. You're like, well, he only uses repeatographs,
Right.
but this guy only uses a Hunt 102. Like what,
Mhm.
and you think, okay, if I just start using this Falcon 48 nib,
I'm going to be
it's
just
going to
like
all
that
work
guy.
out, you know, and it never does. And then, you end up having these experiences. Like for me, it started to turn for me slightly before I quit my job, just like you go up to someone like Jeff Darrow and you see he's drawing with like a golf pencil or something. And you're like, none of that matters, like it,
Mhm.
sure, different tools have different advantages, but your mastery of sort of comics isn't going to be your mastery of a tool. It's going to be a mastery of sort of the aspects that make the art form what it is. And then once you have that, yeah, you can draw digitally, you can draw on paper, you can draw however you want, and you can still get good results.
Yeah.
And then yeah, the finding the fun of just working with different things, and when I am at a show or and hanging out with other artists or doing a drink and draw, it's so much fun to just be like, what's in your bag, like let
Mhm.
me try that pen out, and oh, what kind of you using vellum? Oh, I use the plate surface, like what, why do you think of this? And oh, you got some zip tones, let's play with those. And um it's so fun. It's like one of the more kind of dorky fun social activities you can have as a comic book artist, is just tool talk.
It's amazing. And then you look at sort of look at the apex predators out there. You mentioned Darrow. You think about Alex Toth. Just drawing with a Pentel, one of these things. Like this is what Alex Toth spent more time drawing with than any other pen or whatever. Right. And I remember being a college student and asking Golden, I'm like, well, what kind of pencil do you use? And he like just holds up a number 2 Ticonderoga. He's like, this? I'm like I'm thinking like, oh, there's got to be some sort of fancy German pencil, like with a roller lock of some sort. That's the reason it's so good. No, it's just a pencil.
Someone told me another Golden story where he was working on a commission or something, and they were there, and some art collector guy came up, and Michael Golden was using a Sharpie.
It's all he uses.
And the guy was like, well, that's not archival or something. And Michael was like, who cares? Who cares?
Right. Well, that's the thing.
Great. I like that.
You go through the floor, and there's all these great artists, and we love them, and they do brilliant stuff, and they've got their inks, they've got their washes, they got brushes, they got this, they got that. And then you go to his table, and it's just a pile of Sharpies. And you're like, all right, like, because he's just doing a thing. It's just a tool. He's not making artwork for reproduction. He's not doing, he's just sitting there, and this is the easiest thing to do the work that he do.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And even as someone who loves having originals, I mean, I love that. I love to see how they age, and none of it's permanent. You can have the most archival thing ever, man. It's going to burn up in a fire. It's going to rot in 1,000 years. Right? Right. So it's like, I like to see the aging of those things. I like to see weird marks on it, coffee stains, and I try to keep my art pretty clean, but there's messes on it. There's parts where I cut it out, and there's so much whiteout on my stuff. It's just covered in it, but I hope people appreciate that, because to me, the engagement with the original art is that I know that artist was spending time with that piece of paper, and now I get to spend some time with it, and I get to have it, and I get to sort of have that deeper connection to something that has meaning for me. And so the book is one thing. Books by their very nature, I think, are intimate and cerebral things that we get to engage with in a much different way than, say, a movie or music. And I think that that added layer of seeing, a piece of the process that the maker was intimately involved with is that's sort of another, as a fan, that's the drug. And as a creative, that's another drug I'm always after. And if I had $1 million, I'd be buying original art every day. But right now I try to just pick the ones that are great. And as an artist, this too, you sometimes have the advantage of trading with people. And
sure.
And so, I mean, I like seeing the messy stuff. I like seeing the Sharpie fill-ins and the parts where they just put an X and decided to have the colors fill it in. Even something as simple as that is very exciting to me.
Yeah, no, it's all very cool. And I, like when you asked it earlier, and it's the nostalgia aspect just kicks in so often when I'm having, these talks, because I'm like, that's exactly those feelings. That's the feelings when I bought, pages back, in the 90s, going, because you're looking behind, you get to lift the curtain and you get to look back like, oh, this is how it's made. Like there is that kind of magic of seeing the real work.
Yeah.
Damn. That's good stuff.
Now I need to go look at some original art.
I know. So the SCHLUB comes out, was it the 22nd? Third?
Yeah, the 23rd of August, and then we have an issue coming out every month. We're way ahead of schedule, so
Good.
it should be out every month. And the first arc is full of twists and turns and tons of awesome characters, and I just cannot wait for people to see it. And we've got even more twists and turns that you know there's other crazy things going on I can't even mention right now, but they're very exciting, and so
Cool.
I cannot wait for people to see it. And I would like to build an audience as time goes on. I don't feel like, I don't think that I never want to be I wouldn't want it to be a comic where the first issue is the best selling. I mean, that's usually the case, right? But
Right.
I think in a perfect world, you want your book to gain an audience because people enjoy it and they want to
Hmm.
spread the word. And so that's what we're hoping for. And I feel very, very proud of the work we're doing, and it's been an honor to work with them, and to have my first book at Image has been yeah, it's a dream come true. It's a dream come true. Something I've wanted to do forever. So
You got a great lineup to have be your first book with Image, so that's not bad.
very fortunate,
Yeah.
very fortunate to work with. I mean, Ryan is, like I said, one of the greats right now, and Kenny, I think, is a writer who's going to go down. He's on those way up.
Hmm.
They just keep giving him more keys over at DC, and Spicer too. I think Spicer not only is a great colorist, but he works with really great artists,
Yeah.
and also me, and he's a very good colorist, and so it's like all these great pieces have come together, and so I'm very excited about it, and I truly believe if people pick up the book, they'll find something cool about it that they can enjoy.
Yeah. Well, listen, I've only read one issue, but it was great. So
Thank
I'm hopeful too. So I don't get a take. I don't get a cut, cut of the take, but I'm still excited.
you. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Right on. And are you going to any shows for the rest of the year?
So this year I don't have any on the calendar. Hoping next year to get back out there again with the book being a couple issues deep. I had done C2E2 and Heroes Con and Cake earlier this year, and those are three shows that I'm hoping to do again next year. But it would be really great if I could get to the East or West Coast next year as well. I would love to do New York or do Emerald City again, or San Diego or something in LA would be nice. Because I've never actually been to New York City Comic Con,
Oh,
and I've never tabled at San Diego. I've only gone as a attendee. But yeah, hoping to be at more of those.
awesome. Right on. It was an absolute pleasure. I'm really glad we got to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always fun to talk shop with folks, and to meet somebody with your illustrious history, and get a chance to talk to you has been really rewarding for me. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh man, it was an absolute blast. Good luck with the launch of the new book.
Thank you so much.